All right, everyone, welcome to our second Armchair Traveler series of the season. A big thank you to Cindy Buxton and Russ White for putting this on, organizing the whole thing, doing almost 90%, we'll say, of the legwork. We really appreciate it. Last week with Eric Steven exploring the Fairview was a huge success. It was great. I apologize, it has not yet been loaded on the website, but it will be loaded up tomorrow alongside Brian. So if you know anyone who wanted to watch this but couldn't watch it, then come check out the website tomorrow under the e-learning tab and you'll be able to see it. And in case you missed it, if you want to be a part of the Armchair Traveler series, let Cindy know. She will work you in or tell you flat out no, you're lame. One of the two. I forget what she told me earlier. And if you ever have any kind of class or anything you'd like to do where the library can help facilitate that, please contact me, 766-6422. That's part of my job, is to help you share things with the community. So I'm here at your service. So without further ado, please, you are muted upon coming in. Please leave your video off. It just helps with bandwidth and whatnot. At the end, when Brian's done with his presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, ask all the questions you want. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this. Admiralty Island is not a place I would willingly step, so I'm glad Brian went there for me. So without further ado, Cindy and Russ, thank you.
I just want to add also, you can ask questions in the chat box, and Brian might not get to them while he's talking. They flash on the screen for a minute, but if he doesn't get to them while he's talking, we can, he can answer them afterwards. And I've already mentioned what talks are coming up, so I will pass it on to Russ, who will introduce Brian.
So I've known Brian for a few years now. I don't know him that well, but I've been part of his group, Juneau's Hidden History, on Facebook for several years. Been on a few hikes with him. He's also an actor. He's one of the stars of the Netflix series Pirate Gold of Adak Island. And you may remember his talk about Adak last year. And it's a pretty interesting series. I don't know, has it been added for a second year, Brian, or was it just a one-off thing?
I don't think Netflix is doing so well financially right now, because I haven't heard anything.
Okay, well, anyway, it was quite entertaining, and it ended with a cliffhanger. So we'll have to wait and see. But Brian is an explorer of forgotten historic sites and underground mine sites. He's also an ROV pilot, an amateur geologist, a blacksmith, a public speaker, an actor, as I mentioned, a spelunker, and a local historian. And I thought maybe he was also a Photoshop expert, but he said somebody else put that poster together. So we'll let him talk about that if he wants. But here's Brian Weed.
Hey, thanks, everybody. I'm going to be talking about crossing Admiralty Island, and it's on the Admiralty Island canoe route, formerly known as the Tlingit canoe route. The Tlingits used to haul their canoes from one side of Admiralty Island to the other, and they do it over a series of lakes from Mole Harbor over to Angoon, and it was much faster than actually paddling all the way around the island. The CCC in the 1930s did some cleanup on this trail, and then it's had U.S. Forest Service that has been maintaining it ever since. There's some sections of the trail that doesn't get maintained, and then there's other sections that get maintained all the time. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about, is the easiest, fastest route across that is more maintained, so people can see how to do it. I'm going to switch to shared screen, so you're not just staring at me the whole time. I'm going to switch over to a map. If you're looking in the chat box, I posted a link to it right at the top. It works best on computer, but will work on a phone or an iPad if you really needed to. And you're going to see Admiralty Island here. The blue line represents the flight from the Juneau International Airport down to Mole Harbor, and the green line represents the ferry back from Angoon to Walk Bay. All these lines you'll be able to click on if you're actually on the link and not just looking at the shared screen. You can click on these lines, and each one will tell what day, what we were doing during those days. You fly in here to Mole Harbor. The reason why I like to fly into Mole Harbor, some people do this trip east to west, and some people do it west to east. And I prefer to head towards Angoon because then you're always getting closer to civilization, where if you go the other way, you're actually leaving civilization, and you hope it's a nice day for your float plane to land in Mole Harbor to pick you up. Because I've heard of people actually having to sit there for a whole day or two waiting for that float plane to pick them up because it was choppy or nasty weather or fog. And so I prefer to go west to east, so you're actually going towards a town. So there's two different ways to land in Mole Harbor. You can go with Alaska Seaplanes or Ward Air. I have done both over the years. I've done several trips across, and I prefer Ward Air. Ward Air is a little more lenient on their bear spray and their fuel. They put it in a box and they put it in the float, and that's it. You land, you pull it out of the float, you strap your stuff back on, you're good to go. Seaplanes wanted to know the weights of everything. It was a little more complicated, and Ward Air, hands down, was just better for us. Seaplanes also like to land here on the south side of Mole Harbor, and Ward Air likes to land on the north side. And when you land on the north side at low tide, this is a very nice beach to walk. And the south side of Mole Harbor is not a very nice beach to walk. You immediately have to inflate your pack raft and paddle across. Every time I do it, I try to take people over to Alan Hasselberg's homestead. If you're familiar with the Bear Man of Admiralty, he lived at Mole Harbor. I've done some research on where his old homestead used to be, and it's down here. We paddle up the Mole River. If it's low tide, we might deflate our pack rafts and kind of walk up in here. There's a trail right along the shore here, and you'll get here to a large patch of salmonberry bushes, and in that large patch of salmonberry bushes are the remains of his cabin. There's pots and pans and old boards. It's not anything really amazing to look at, but if you've read The Bear Man of Admiralty, it's a really neat place where you can kind of picture how this guy lived off the land in this area. There are some private cabins along the shoreline here that you need to respect private property. They're fairly good size. Like there's a house right here on the corner. So we kind of walk the edge of the river to go around it. I always try to visit that, and then we come back. There's a shelter here. And I've marked all the different shelters. I've marked the approximate route so people can follow it. I've marked miles, how many miles it is. And so people will be able to use this map and kind of plan their trip. There's cabins along the way. I talk about campsites. There's 2 cabins up here, another cabin down here. There's a mine site we're going to talk about, some waterfalls. And I talk about the different routes. And so I'm providing this map. So when I do my slideshow and the video, you know what we're talking about, and you can follow along with this map if you need to later on. It's also great for planning your route. A couple of things I'll talk about are the 2 alternative routes. We have the Salt Lake alternative route that I'll talk about. And then we have the long zigzag down to Mitchell Bay. I'll talk about those 2 routes because that's an alternative. And then we have what's called the back channel, which is this orange line. And then we have the green and the blue line, which is the main channel for Mitchell Bay. Those are an alternate routes depending on the tides. The tides in Mitchell Bay can be extreme. 16-foot Lund with a 40 horse on the back can sometimes, depending on the tide, not be able to make it into Mitchell Bay because of the rip currents in some of these sections, especially right here at the rapids. So I'm going to start a little slideshow here so you guys get to see what this entails. Actually, I'm going to share a list with you guys here real quick. Let me figure out how to stop my share or new share. We're going to go to shared screen, and I'm going to share my desktop with you. Hold on a second. I'm going to share my gear list first. Can everybody see the gear list? Can I get a confirmation from somebody that we can see it?
Yes, Brian.
Okay. So sharing my gear list here, I try to pack pretty light for this. The reason why I'm sharing the gear list now is because people can take a screenshot of it if they need it. You'll have it later on as part of the presentation. But this is everything I take when I cross Admiralty. And the clothing might change based on the weather. I've gone on a really rainy time, and I've gone on half rain, half sun, and I've gone on full sun. So your clothing might change, but this is pretty much what I take every time I go. So now that you have that gear list, we're going to switch over here to my slideshow. I've taken several groups across as part of Juneau's Hidden History. It's not guiding because I'm not taking any money or anything. I just enjoy going across, and I enjoy taking other people with me. A bunch of friends. Sometimes I don't even know the people when they show up, but we, do some research ahead of time and do some practicing on pack rafting just to make sure they can make it across. But this is a route like Boy Scouts used to do in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I don't think they do it anymore, but they used to do it with canoes and kayaks, hauling them across. But now that we have pack rafts that weigh less than 10 pounds, it makes it really easy. So these are the different groups that I've taken across. And I think I'm sharing this right. You guys might be looking at it funny. I'm not. Nope. I guess I'm doing it right. So this is the last group that I went across with. It was 70 plus degrees the whole time. And I think we saw clouds on the second or third day, but there was basically no clouds at all. Everybody got sunburned. Oh, something's wrong. There we go. So flying in, this is what your airplane looks like. This is Ward Air. They pack all our bags in the back of the airplane, and we all crowd into this little tiny plane, and it flies about 50 miles to Mole Harbor and drops you off. You have to be prepared to be wet as soon as you step out of the plane, because the airplane cannot pull directly up to the water or the shoreline. You can see here we're all wearing extra tufts, and they don't want to damage these floats, so they get as close as they can, but you end up stepping out and almost the top of your extra tufts. So I usually use water shoes when I get out of the plane. Here's Ward Air dropping us off on one of the rainier trips. And we have to assist them before they leave. Like, we help turn the plane and actually point it back into the ocean so they can fire up the engine and fly away. This is Mole Harbor. It's high tide in this picture. We're right at the Mole River. This is my buddy Greg. You'll see he is carrying some bear protection with him. Something to think about, bear spray or firearm. Usually when you're in a group this big, you don't tend to see bears. 6, 7 people make a lot of noise. The bears know you're there. We've seen bears at a distance, but never anything close. Going up Mole Harbor to the Hasselberg homestead, like I was talking about at the very beginning. There's ruins and relics left behind. There's a wash basin left at his homestead. And unfortunately, if you spend too much time at Alan Hasselberg's house, the tide goes out, and Mole Harbor is one huge mud plain. So mud goes out half a mile or more, and it's super shallow for a long way. So if you stay too long at Alan Hasselberg's house at high tide, you end up carrying your pack raft and all your gear across a mud flat, which isn't very fun. There's a shelter right at the very beginning of our trail. This is where we kind of geared up, made sure we had everything ready. There's a stream about half mile up the trail that we fill up water for the very first time. Usually on your flight, you have a gear problem as far as weight goes. So I tend to not carry fresh water when we land. We fill up once we've landed. And we're starting the trail. The trail's pretty good. Here was prior to the Forest Service doing some work. They've since trimmed and put some boards down and some steps, making it a lot nicer for a lot of the main sections. The reason why I also go west to east is because of the wind. The wind in the early June, July tends to blow from the southeast. So that would be pushing you across the lakes for the most part. The downside of starting at Mole Harbor and heading to Angoon is you're going to the highest altitude first. So you're going to hike the highest you can possibly get at the start of this hike. And then from then on, everything's downhill. But that first day, when you're the strongest, but you might have the heaviest pack, is going to be hard. So lots of breaks. This was the very first time I went across, so everybody had heavy bags. Once you hike up the hill, you hit the Lake Alexander. This is the Lake Alexander shelter. A good thing to bring is bug nets. I didn't have it on my list. A bug net is perfect to bring because Lake Alexander has biting black flies. If you hit it in the early months, it's just the biting flies, but later on it can be mosquitoes too. You paddle across the lake, you hit the Alexander cabin. These are all rentable cabins by the U.S. Forest Service. There tends to be firewood there. There's a nice little fire pit. If you need fresh water, you can get it at all these lakes. You want to have a good filter though, because beavers do live in the lakes. You don't want to fill up near a beaver dam or a beaver house. But for the most part, a standard water filter will filter out Giardia and anything else that might be in the water. So it's really nice. Like if you bring a dog along, they can just drink right out of the lake for the most part. You're not dealing with salt water. One of the rainier times at Lake Alexander. Leaving Lake Alexander cabin, you can see the woodshed in the background. The cabin's over on the far right. In this case, we brought a little firewood with us because we knew there wasn't going to be firewood at the next cabin. And we paddle into Beaver Lake. You can see our pack rafts are kind of fully loaded. Some of our guys, especially their very first time, like our friend Matt here, like he's using a heavy life jacket. He's got a lot of big, heavy gear. He brought some bungee cords. I mean, he really hauled some weight on this trip. As you go through Beaver Lake, you cross a little slough. This is what the slough looks like. And then you have a short portage. We deflated our boats during this short portage. And it was because there was a lot of Devil's Club along the way. We didn't want to risk one of the pack rafts getting poked by the Devil's Club. You can see here on this guy's chest, he's carrying bear spray and a firearm combo. Never had to use it, but glad we had it. On the other side, there are these provided skiffs that are at most of the portage sites. The U.S. Forest Service provides these skiffs. Some people will fly like a little 4-horse motor in and actually put it on these skiffs and putter around the lakes. If they do any kind of fishing or stay at a cabin for any length of time. We mainly used them as a chair. This is Lake Hasselberg, one of the biggest lakes crossing Admiralty Island. The thing's huge. In the afternoon, it can get really windy. So if you're here on the lake and it's a sunny day and it's afternoon, you'll get the like katabatic winds like the Mendenhall Glacier gets. And the winds come tearing down that section. I am going to try to open the chat window here too, because I can't see it. Just one second. I don't think I can see it. Anyways, at Lake Hasselberg, there's an old mine site. The mine site's right on the edge of the lake. This is where Alan Hasselberg did some mining for silver and lead. What we're looking at is the remains of the vein. Here's what the ore looked like. We have galena here, which is lead. There's some heavy iron. There's probably some silver mixed in there too, but it's one of the things to see along the lake if you're out exploring. I have it marked on the map. It's on the south side of Lake Hasselberg. There's several islands in the middle of the lake that are cool to check out. This is the Hasselberg cabin. It is the smallest cabin you can rent. It says it sleeps 2, but you can actually fit 4 in it if the 2 people sleep on the floor and don't mind mice. It's tiny. I slept on the bottom bunk and I could not physically sit up in the bottom bunk without hitting my head. I had about 2 feet from where I was laying down to the top of the upper bunk. So real tiny thing. It used to be a 3-sided shelter that was enclosed. There's a woodshed there on the right. There's a Forest Service boat that's available. There's freshwater clams in the water right in front of the cabin, which is kind of cool. My understanding is freshwater clams don't have the PSP that the saltwater clams do. So they are technically edible, though I've never tried one. That's what the little cabin looks like. You know, pretty small little guy. Nearby is a 3-sided shelter that people can camp at. So if you have a bigger group, you can split the group up between the 3-sided shelter and the Hasselberg cabin. Near the Hasselberg cabin is a waterfall. You have to watch out for that if you're paddling around. Waterfall is hard to see, so when you're paddling, kind of listen for it. This is the cascade below the falls. The falls are about a 30-foot drop. This is the, I'm going to say it wrong, Shawnee cabin. There's two of them. There's Big Shahi and Little Shahi. They're side by side. A beautiful cabin. Looks exactly like the picture. Sleeps like 6-7 people. Real nice on the inside. And the little cabin, it's about 100 yards away. It's right here. Looks like the traditional Forest Service cabin. Really nice if you want to just spend like a 4th of July weekend. You rent a float plane and you take said float plane and you land at these cabins. You rent them both. And you could have a pretty big party there at Lake Hasselberg. Definitely worthwhile. A lot of hiking in the woods. A lot of people wore extra tufts. I wore extra tufts my first time. Since then, I've switched over to hiking boots, and then I bring some sort of water socks or water shoe. So when I am pack rafting, I can just step in and out of the boat and not worry about it. I find that when I wear extra tufts, my feet get sweaty anyway. So might as well wear a comfortable boot that when it's damp, it's fine. We didn't see a whole lot of bears. When you have this many people hiking in the woods, you just don't see bears. The only time we really saw bears was from a distance when we were on the lake. We'd see a bear right on the edge of the lake, or we'd see a bear on the beach when we hit Mitchell Bay. And I'm going to check out this chat. Oh, I can actually see the chat. I'm sorry. There we go. And I need to mute something. I'm sorry, guys. I have something making noise. All right. You paddle out of Lake Hasselberg, and there's a pretty long portage that takes you over to Lake Diston. At Lake Diston, we usually stop for lunch at the little 3-sided shelter here. And from here at this 3-sided shelter, you could take an alternative route into Lake Diston. However, I've never done it. Every time plans just didn't work out, and I've never made it over to Lake Diston. I did rent the sportsman cabin that's at Lake Diston and shows up on the map. However, a tree landed on it a couple of years ago, and the Forest Services pulled it down. So if you're planning your route, don't plan on staying at the cabin on Lake Diston. I think it's Diston. It's called the Sportsman's Cabin, and it doesn't exist anymore. They pulled it down. Fire starter, good thing to bring. When it's wet and raining and everyone is cold, having the means to start a fire raises morale big time. You'll see some of the days it was sunny, other days it was super cloudy. Some days the sun came out and just blinded us all. This is the Davidson Lake Shelter. It's my least favorite of the bunch, being that if you're looking at the map, the Lake Davidson Shelter should be a cabin, and it's not. Everybody has to basically stop and spend the night at the Lake Davidson Shelter just because of how long the portage is each way into Mitchell Bay. And so it's the most used shelter probably on the whole route. And there's not a lot of camping spots to set up a tent, maybe 2 spots, if that. And then the shelter is just kind of the standard size shelter. So we tend to have to end up setting up our tents in the shelter because there's not a lot of space. I really wish they'd turn this into a cabin or clear some trees or something, because there's not a lot of space there at Lake Davidson. This is what the shelter looks like when it's empty. We spent the night in here where we had 7 people all line up their beds, their sleeping pads. And we actually slept outside the tents one year because there was no bugs. And it's good if it's not raining, but otherwise it drips. That's that holster I was talking about that Bo was packing around that gives him the choice of firearm or bear spray. On the way into Mitchell Bay, there are a lot of windfalls. The Forest Service does its best to keep these clear, but you're constantly climbing over stuff. I want to guess maybe 20 trees we climbed over this last year. but there was a Forest Service team right at the head of Mitchell Bay that was just starting to cut trees for the season and kind of clear the path. But I would assume every year 2 or 3 trees must drop across the trail. I think last year was probably the worst year I've seen. We're going to talk about the 2 alternate routes, going to the Salt Lake or continuing the zigzag down into Mitchell Bay. I've done both routes. Both have their pluses and minuses. The Salt Lake, here we look very sad and depressed because we were all cold and wet and miserable. You're walking through very soft mud, carrying your gear. It's heavy. You have to carry your water here because this is the last time you're going to see fresh water as a creek right before the Salt Lake. I'll show it on the map here in a few minutes. So you get your fresh water. You got to hike out with your fresh water to the Salt Lake. The Salt Lake is very shallow at low tide. And this is what we look like for the Facebook picture, but we didn't look like it until I said, smile, please. Some people were ready to cry. They were so cold. Out here on the lake, we started to get downpoured on. It was very shallow. People were running aground. We had to lift ourselves up. You definitely want to hit the Salt Lake at high tide in Mitchell Bay. Tides are very important in Mitchell Bay. The Salt Lake is affected by the tides. Much of Mitchell Bay has reefs. And if you're not paying attention to the tide, you can rip your pack raft open on one of these barnacle reefs. Most of the time when you're moving around in Mitchell Bay, you want to do it at the slack high tide. As you're leaving the Salt Lake, there is a cascade / waterfall right near the end. I have it marked on the map with a little waterfall icon. It can be up to about a 20-foot drop. Here it was only like 2 or 3 feet. It's deceiving in the picture, but it's ripping through there. This last time I went during the sunny time, we hit it right at the high tide and you couldn't even tell it was there, but you looked under the water and you could see all the barnacles and kind of the cascade underneath you that would rip you apart if you hit it at a low tide. Entering Mitchell Bay, it can be choppy, it can be windy, it can be flat, it can be miserable just like this, or it could be not a cloud in the sky and 75 degrees. But on those days, the winds can be ripping pretty good. So you definitely got to watch it when you hit there. We sat till the winds kind of died down here at this first rock at the head of Mitchell Bay and waited till the wind died down before we started paddling over to Diamond Island for our campsite. Diamond Island, probably the best place to camp in Mitchell Bay, and the locals know it. Every time I have gone to camp at Diamond Island, another group has attempted to show up and camp on Diamond Island also. Each time they've been very polite and moved on, and they've been very disappointed that we were there first. So if you can't camp at Diamond Island, there's another island just to the south. I don't remember the name of it, but I'll look it up. I thought it was like Defense Island or something like that, but it's just a little island just south of Diamond Island. It has a bunch of campsites on it too. Lots of places to set up your tents, lots of dry firewood. I have showed up on Diamond Island after a complete downpour and still been able to find enough dry brush under these old growth trees to start a fire. There's plenty of tree sap, small branches, so you can get the fire going. We had 4-foot flames in 20 minutes one time. Lots of neat stuff on the beach at Diamond Island. There's these sandstone kind of washed out pillar looking things. If you hit kind of late June, you can get beach asparagus on Diamond Island. So if you want to supplement your food, beach asparagus tastes a lot like broccoli and is pretty tasty. The one place to get fresh water if you're camping on Diamond Island or the one just south of it, I have it marked on the map. It's on the south side of Mitchell Bay near the little inlet called Clearwater Creek. I've gone during the driest, hottest days, and that creek is always flowing. It's always clear water. Just get it up away from the tide a little so you don't get any seaweed or anything in your water filter. This is kind of the place you want to fill up on water for the rest of the trip. I usually bring like a 2-gallon jug. And so I'll fill it up right before we leave Diamond Island. And we'll use that the rest of the way out of Mitchell Bay. If you go south of Diamond Island and into a little inlet to the south on the map, there is a coal mine there. and that coal mine operated in the early 1900s. And there's much in the way of relics still there. There's ore carts, boilers. There's still open shafts, train tracks. There's sea caves around the area. Just a neat little inlet if you can get into it. You do have to time the tides right, where you go in on the slack tide, or excuse me, you go in on the low tide, and as the tide's coming in, it shoots you into this little inlet. You explore the inlet for about 6 hours, and then you ride the tide out. So as soon as the tide changes directions, you basically shoot out the other side. It's pretty fast. You're moving probably 6-7 miles an hour, depending on how you catch the tides. So it looks like a long ways, but if you time the tides, it's pretty fast in a pack raft. This is a boiler. And then on the right, there's a hoist. It's a steam donkey hoist. Here's the main shaft for the coal mine. There's a fan here with a blower that blew fresh air into the mine. The mine went down at an angle and has since been flooded. So you can't really go into it, but there's a lot of neat stuff around the area. The other alternate route that I mentioned before is if you take the main channel. I usually work my way up from Diamond Island and we camp on Long Island, which is a little closer to Angoon. This is Long Island here in the photo. It's not as nice as Diamond Island. The campsites aren't as great. They're a little lumpy. But we did have a whale come right through this section, which is the skinniest section in Mitchell Bay. So we got to see a bull humpback whale in 30 feet of water because the tide was low. And this humpback, he couldn't have been more than 20 feet from shore. You could see his whole body in the water as he was pumping up and down. You know, in 30 feet of water, he was just stirring everything up, trying to fight his way into Mitchell Bay to get some food. This is the lumpy campsite on Long Island. And then if you take the inner channels, you work your way through the inner channels. On the map, you'll get to this little skinny thing we call Bear Alley. If you decide to do Mitchell Bay during the spawning salmon run, I suggest not taking the back route. If you take the back route, you go through Bear Alley. It's not called Bear Alley because there's penguins. The fish come into this area. They get trapped. The bears can come on either side. This is high tide. You got to get out of your boat and kind of just push it along for a little ways. I prefer this route early June before the fish come, just because you dodge the main rapids in the main channel. But you definitely don't want to go this route during bear season. The alternative campsite to Long Island is this one that's shown on the map. It's in view of Angoon, gets Wi-Fi, or not Wi-Fi, but internet. It's nice and flat. It's just past the rapids. However, there's no fresh water. Same with Long Island. So you end up bringing your water from up in Mitchell Bay at the Clearwater Creek. But beautiful campsites. In this photo, you can see the rapids at the far end of the screen, right up in the middle. This is almost at the peak low tide. So it's really ripping through here, probably, I don't know, 10 miles an hour. You couldn't paddle upstream for sure. And I've heard of 16-foot Lunds with 40 horses that couldn't make it up during this time of day. It's dangerous with a pack raft because it's so shallow. If you hit a barnacle covered reef, you'll just rip your pack raft wide open. So something to watch out for if you're like, I'm just going to shoot the rapids. You know, I've done whitewater before. It's not the same in saltwater, so watch out. This is if the group that came from Long Island waiting for the tide to change so we can do the rapid section. In this photo, the water is still going the other way. So we actually paddled up as far as we could. And now we're just sitting here waiting for the tide to switch directions. And as soon as it goes slack, we head towards Angoon. This is obviously Angoon as we're paddling in. That big building is the store owned by our friend Sue. You think you're at basically you're home free because I can see Angoon. It's safe now, right? What you don't know if you've never been to Angoon is there's an inlet off to our right in this picture. And that inlet, when the tide is changing, is skinny. I think it's 1/8 of a mile across or less. And that is all that there is that drains Mitchell Bay. So all this water we've seen in Mitchell Bay this whole time all comes out like an 1/8 of a mile gap. So when the tide changes, it looks like a washing machine. There's a wave like 4 feet high that stands up as all of Mitchell Bay is crashing into the ocean trying to leave. We didn't know that our first trip. So as we paddled into Angoon, I'm paddling in front of everybody. Everybody's like, I'm going to get ice cream at the store. It's going to be amazing. And I noticed like the tide is starting to change. And right about probably another 1/4 mile closer, everything's being sucked towards that little inlet. I start screaming at everybody else, hey, paddle hard, paddle hard. And our group just barely made it to shore. Bad image here, but you can see the rip current behind Greg holding up his pack raft here, or his paddle. If you got caught in that rip current, you're getting shot out to that 4-foot high wave that's standing out there at the ocean. And I honestly don't know if you could pull yourself out of it. So if you paddle into Angoon, either know the tide is slack tide or paddle towards the float plane dock. And once you get near shore over there, work your way back over to the store if you want to go to the store. But don't try to cross right in front of the store if you don't know what the tide's doing. We usually pull in right here next to the store. The store is that gray building with the blue roof. There's now a new house next to this brown one that's falling down the hill. But there's a little gap between that 2 houses, and we pull up on the beach and walk right up to the road through that little gap. Our friend Sue, like I said, owns the store. She usually sees us coming. I usually call the Angoon trading post before we come, and she's looking for us. We go into the store, we buy a few things. If they're having a COVID outbreak, they ask that people wear masks. It's a small community, mostly elderly community, so they're pretty protective. So you may want to bring a mask depending on what's going on with COVID. And then Sue, after we do our grocery shopping, she gives us a ride to the ferry terminal. So you don't have to walk that extra 3 miles, which is really nice. So be nice to Sue. We always give her a big thumbs up. We get our Blue Bunny ice cream. We all load up in the car and she gives us a ride out to the ferry terminal. Super fun trip. We eat all our extra food out there. We always save 1 day's worth of food, but we all end up eating it waiting for the ferry. If you timed it where you have to wait a day, there's a place to camp right out there by the ferry terminal. There's a little cemetery. There's a bathroom right next to the ferry terminal that was unlocked, and there's fresh water nearby. The ferry comes in, you hop on the ferry, you pack up your stuff, and you're heading back to Juneau. And that's the end of my slideshow. Let me go back to my regular screen here. Oh, I think I'm there. Can you guys see me? Yes? No? Can anyone see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. So I've provided the map. I've provided a gear list. I've kind of shown you what you're going to get yourself into. I have a video of our last trip. It's about 9 minutes. I'm going to play that. It has some audio to it. Because I'm wearing headphones, I don't know how well the audio is going to show up, but I did put some subtitles in so you know which part of the map we're talking about at the time. And then I'll open it up to questions if you guys have gear questions, what kind of pack rafts, when you want to do certain tides. I'm happy to answer those questions. But I really wanted you guys to see what the trip looks like and see that it doesn't take a ton of planning. There isn't a lot of whitewater or things to be super worried about. The only things you got to watch are really the tide in Mitchell Bay. So I'm going to go back here to the screen share one more time. I'm going to share my main screen. I need to exit out of this, and I don't know how. Hold up. I'm going to move my camera for a sec. There we go. Just 1 second here. Oh, wrong one. That one. And pictures don't always do it justice. So I wanted to throw together a little video so you guys can see what this actually looks like. We're going to go to screen share one more time. And here we go. You guys can see it. I'm going to put that down there. and go. This is getting water at that first creek. You'll notice there's a tree across the trail there. Here, 4 trees had dropped down over one section of the trail, so we had to go around them. Everybody started putting on their bug nets. Lake Alexander, every single time I've been there, it's been bad bugs.
Yes, it'd be bad if the
Mhm. Oh,
That's the waterfall I was talking about at Lake Castleberg. You can't really tell it's there, but that's about a 30-foot drop. In the afternoon at Lake Castleberg, it gets pretty windy. So if you're paddling to those cabins on the north side of Lake Castleberg, be prepared for a little chop. one of the longer portages is from Hasselberg into Lake Gruning, and it is over a hill, so you definitely got to go uphill a little bit. That's where I tend to see a lot of the bear sign. This is a slough that connects Lake Diston and Lake Gruning. There's a little slough that connects the two. It's a loon. About halfway down Lake Davidson, there's a little freshwater creek. There's a little gravel beach next to it, and it's a great place to stop if you're tired. At the Davidson shelter, there's not any firewood, but there's always firewood on the far side of the lake from where the wind blows all the trees. So the group went out and did some firewood hunting in the skiff. I'm surprised I didn't flip over. Jeez. Like I was saying, the Lake Davidson shelter is pretty small. So if you go in a big group, this group was like 7 or 8 of us. There's just no room to pitch tents. There's maybe room for like 2 tents on the trail and then 2 tents in the shelter. And then everything else is hillside or like big tree roots. So there's not a lot of flat places. If you had a hammock, maybe it'd be a good place to camp. What we were finding out here was our friend Troy brought like a 3-pound or 2-pound chocolate bar. And of course, this is like day 3 or 4 or something. So he'd been holding out on us. He had this giant chocolate bar. Definitely a treat when you've been eating Mountain House for several days. We wondered why his bag was so heavy. Yeah, we're coming down from Lake Davidson into Mitchell Bay, and it's about 3 miles to the Salt Lake. And good grief, at least a dozen trees were tipped over on the trail, dropped from windfalls. You got to zigzag around them. Sometimes you climb over stuff. Sometimes you actually had to take your backpack off and pass it over to another member of the group. You can always see the trail, but you can't always get to it because of the trees. So no point where we ever lost. It was just hard to get over a tree sometimes. This is the longest portage of the trip. If you take the zigzags, it's about 4 miles. And if you go to the Salt Lake, it's 3. This one was bad. People had to take their bags off just to get under some of these. What's nice is later in the summer, the Forest Service has come up and have cut a lot of that stuff out of the way. So if you do hit the canoe route in the summertime and you hit it end of the season, you might have less trees than at the beginning of the season. However, then you have to deal with bears and fish, where in May and June, you don't have to as much. This is getting out to the Salt Lake. You might be able to inflate your pack raft and go down the creek, but it's pretty shallow. So you tend to have to wade across these grass flats for a little bit till you get to a deeper part of the lake. All that water in front of me is about 4 inches deep. And then it's thigh deep mud under the water. So if you try to inflate your pack raft there on the shore, you step out and you go about thigh deep in the mud and have to have somebody help pull you out. I experienced that. Here you're going to see my life jacket. I use an airplane life jacket from a commercial airlines. There's no whitewater here on the Cross Admiralty trip. It's all either ocean or lakes, and the ocean could be choppy, but you're not going to flip a pack raft in it. So I tend to take the airplane life jacket just because it's so lightweight. This is Diamond Island Base Camp. Lots of neat rock formations in Mitchell Bay. It's looking towards Angoon. If you're into the beach asparagus, that whole grassy thing in front of us is all beach asparagus, and off to the left and out to that point on the west side of Diamond Island. Those are white sea anemones. It was like a -4 tide. So we were able to see some animal life you don't usually get to see. Where Greg and I went and paddled around Mitchell Bay. We headed over to the Clearwater Creek to pick up fresh water. You can see the tide ripping out of that narrow, skinny thing that is where the coal mine is. So when you come shooting out of the coal mine at the reverse tide, you get to whiz across all that. You're going about 10 miles an hour. If you catch it the other way, you're going fast on the way in. Here we fill up on water for the next couple of days. Everybody filled up all their bladders using the filters. Plus we carry it like a 2.5 gallon water jug. We fill that up too, because we need water for the next day. And we used to be able to get it out of the lakes, but this is all salt water, so we can't use this water anymore. This is Bear Alley. During the fish season, this is all covered in dead fish. There's dead fish on the beach. There's dead fish in the water. There's bears everywhere in this area. So don't take the back channels during fish season unless you're prepared to deal with bear. Somebody was lost. And this site also doesn't have fresh water, so you got to share the water. Here we're seeing the rapid section that's marked on my map at the skinniest part of Mitchell Bay. If you go the main channel, you have to time the rapids. You want to hit it during the high slack tide. Here we get a better view of the rapids. Like it says in the caption, this is almost peak low tide. What looks like just regular rapids, if you're used to like river rafting, you're like, oh, that's no problem. But there's whirlpools in that are like 10, 15 feet across and will suck your pack raft right down in it. I almost flipped on one of the trips I did where I got sucked into a whirlpool. Plus, there's barnacles under the water with the reefs, and you can rip open your pack rafts on the barnacles that you don't tend to deal with in rivers. On this trip, Greg and I checked out 2 old fort sites that were in the area called Whalehead Fort. That's it in the background there. And got to kind of see like how the fort was set up, and there was some building ruins, and you could see the old garden beds. It's the new house that's built next to the beat up old house that I showed in the pictures. We're kind of going up the old house's easement on the side. The property owner of the really nice house was kind to us and was like, go ahead. Sue's giving us a ride to the ferry terminal. And we kind of wait here for the ferry. The ferry will show up right out there. And so you got a clear view of it when it pulls in, and you hop on the ferry and you head back to Juneau. If you have a full float plane, 8 people plus gear, it comes to about $200 a person. And then the ferry ride, I think, was $68 from Mangoon back to Juneau. So it's a fairly cheap trip to do. Overall, maybe $400 when you count in food and other things like that. So that's what I got. Crossing Admiralty Island isn't incredibly difficult. It's fairly cheap as far as packraft trips go, especially if you fill the Super Otter with 8 people plus gear. They say they can hold 9 people, but they can't hold 9 people in gear. Did we see deer? We saw lots of deer sign. Most of the time when you're hiking with 6, 7, 8 people, you don't see a whole lot of deer, especially I always bring a dog. So no, don't see a lot of deer. What do I think about PVC versus the nylon blend for packraft material? Some people try to save money and build their own packraft. My friend Adam did it. His packraft is significantly lighter than the store-bought alpaca packrafts or the Copapelli packrafts. However, he's very thorough and did a great job on building his packraft, but it always leaks. I don't know if he trusts the seams in whitewater, but he's always having to add air to it. It becomes a time versus money thing. I would, if you're going across, 60, 70 miles of backcountry, I want a store-bought packraft that I know is built right. So if you plan on saving money by building your own packraft, I think you're going to find you're going to be unhappy with it. The elevation gain the first day is maybe like 1,000 feet or less. It's not super high, but it zigzags up the hill. It's not super fast. You're carrying all your weight. I recommend that people carry 50 pounds or less. You start carrying over 50 pounds. If you slip and fall, you're going to twist your knee, your ankle, that kind of thing. I try to get my bag right around 40 pounds. But most people probably the first day are sporting about 45 pounds for their bag. I see people have Copapelli or alpaca packrafts. Is there a big difference? So I've personally owned both. I've used both. Copapellis, their tubes are not as tall as a alpaca packraft. They tend to be about 2 inches shorter. So you're in the water deeper, I guess. They also don't track as well for long distance. The Copapelli packrafts, you're constantly paddling on both sides to keep you tracking in a straight line. And we noticed the alpacas, especially the bigger alpacas, tracked better across the lakes. Copapellis and alpacas tend to weigh about the same, so that's not a big difference. Price-wise, Copapellis are a couple $100 cheaper. If you take a Copapelli Rogue, some of the guys use the Rogue or the Rogue Light. It's significantly cheaper, about $600. You don't need a spray skirt because you're going to wear rain gear if it's raining anyway. But it's kind of personal preference. I prefer the alpacas. They're like a tank. I've gotten one hole in an alpaca pack raft, and it's because I jumped in it when it was on top of some barnacles. But I've owned one for almost 10 years now, and the thing's solid. You guys said you weren't getting audio with the video, but I think you were getting me talking. I didn't have a lot of audio with the music playing. I'm sorry. I couldn't figure out a way to get it to work. The map is shown in the links up above. I provided a couple links for it. The gear list, when this goes live on the Haynes library page, you'll be able to see that gear list. Or you could take a photo of it with your phone right now if you like. I can share it one more time here. I will do that. There is the gear list. So you could whip your phone out and take a picture of the screen right now, and you'd have a picture of my gear list. I'll wait a few seconds here because I think some people will probably do that. The only thing it doesn't show on there is the head bug net. So I would recommend a head bug net. You'll notice I don't bring a ton of clothes. People bring way too many clothes when they go camping. You're going to be smelly. You're going to be stinky. You're going to smell like fish, and you're going to smell like campfire. And so is everybody else. If I get a pair of clothes wet, I usually put on a pair of shorts and my long underwear with another shirt or just my puffy. We build a fire and we dry our stuff. At no point have I ever not been able to build a fire on the Cross Admiralty trip. Every night we've had a fire. So I'm going to stop the share on the screen and I'm back. How do you inflate your pack raft? So the pack rafts, excuse me, the pack rafts come with an inflatable bag. During the video, one of the females was using a blue bag to inflate her pack raft. It's a nylon bag that screws into the adapter on the pack raft. You burp it open like a trash bag when you shake it and you're trying to stick it in the trash can. It fills with air, and then you squeeze it into the pack raft. And it's like the equivalent of like, I don't know, 40, 50 breaths into the pack raft. So much better. Bear bag or barrel. I have used a bear bag and I have not used a bear bag. If you go in early June, we've seen one bear every trip. They've usually been on the far shore. We're camping on islands for the most part, or we're inland, and the bears during early June tend to be on the shoreline because they're eating barnacles and other fish stuff because there isn't a lot of food inland to eat. And you're only staying one day at each spot. So I don't tend to have problems with bear, especially with big groups. But we'll put them in a dry bag and hang them up into a tree if we start having a bear issue. I've seen people do it in 3 days, and I like to do it in 6 days, 5 nights. On my map, I think we did it in 5, but right around 5 or 6 days is a nice, comfortable pace. You're doing somewhere between 8 and 10 miles of pack rafting and hiking that way. It makes it more enjoyable. You stop, you're done by, say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you can go explore the rest of the day, or you can just sit and enjoy the weather if it's nice. You could squeeze it in and probably cross it in 2 days if you really wanted to. It wouldn't be fun. Anybody else have anything?
You're also free to unmute yourselves and ask questions online. You don't have to use a chat if you want.
Thanks, Brian. It's a great talk. Looks like a great trip.
Yeah, I appreciate all of the details. You've put out quite a resource for the public with all of those good information, good instructions, so someone can do it themselves. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I want to stress that Boy Scouts did this in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. You don't have to be super outdoorsy to do this trip. With some careful planning, making sure you know how to pack raft, and look at my gear list. The maps are there with new technology. You can download maps onto your cell phone and use the GPS on your cell phone with those maps. I use a Backcountry Navigator and Gaia GPS for my two navigating tools on my phone. And I carry a backup battery for my phone that lasts the whole time.
Have you ever run into anybody else on the trip doing the cross trip, like with a canoe or something?
Never with a canoe, but one time we had a plane land and drop us off. And within 10 minutes, we ran into a group that was expecting a flight from the same company.
Oh, wow.
And they just weren't out of the trees yet. Otherwise, we would have had our plane wait, and they could have flown back instead of it would have saved the company some money for sure. But yeah, we ran into a group that was just hiking out at Mole Harbor just as we were landing. I've run into Forest Service crew working on the trail before. And I've run into people that have float planed in to stay at a cabin the day that we're leaving from the cabin. But I've never run into a crew that was like midway across and we just ran into each other going opposite directions. Other than weight, what about using a whitewater kayak? Well, whitewater kayaking, you're going to use, what are they, 60 pounds? You're going to drag that hard plastic thing through the woods. No other downside, I guess, except weight. And a whitewater kayak isn't as comfortable as a pack raft. I have a mule alpaca pack raft. It's made for like 6 foot tall people. I can lay in that thing. My favorite month is early June. I've gone as early as like May 25th, and I've still seen some snow on the trail. But first week of June is like my sweet spot time for doing cross Admiralty.
And the Boy Scouts used to do it with canoes?
I used to do it with canoes, aluminum canoes. I cannot imagine doing it with aluminum canoe. Because think about it. There's no way you can take the canoe plus your gear in the same portage. It's too heavy. So you have to portage everything 3 times. So let's say you're going from Lake Davidson into Mitchell Bay. That's 3 miles to the Salt Lake. So you're going to carry the canoe down to the Salt Lake, 3 miles. Then you're going to walk back to Lake Davidson uphill 3 miles, grab your gear, and then walk back to the Salt Lake 3 miles. So you're going to do 9 miles just to get it down to the Salt Lake. Anybody else a
Hi.
question? Yeah.
Yes, I have a comment. I actually did this from west to east. We went away from the people in 1981 and we used aluminum canoes and it was a great trip. And yes, we did a lot of portaging and double trekking, but that's before pack rafts were invented, I think.
Do you know how much your canoe weighed? Like 60 pounds, 80 pounds, more than that?
Well, it was an aluminum canoe, so they were pretty long, and it wasn't always easy to portage it either through the woods in places. But it was interesting to see your slides because, like, we had mostly just shelters, and the little cabin was at Hasselberg then, but it was it looks like a lot more cabins, a lot more big cabins than we had. It was a little more primitive.
Yeah, there's several nice cabins now on the lakes. But like I said, the Sportsman cabin still shows up on the map, but it's gone.
Yeah. Thank you for your show.
You're welcome. Is there a bit of competition for the cabins? Yeah. So keep in mind the cabins for the U.S. Forest Service open 6 months in advance. So if you were going to plan this trip, you'd want to book your cabins now. We're already into July for Forest Service cabin rentals. Do you prefer avoiding the Salt Lake or hike over the small cove into Mitchell Bay? Go to the Salt Lake. If you have to choose and you prefer paddling over hiking, Salt Lake every time. Try to time it with the high tide. If you can't, don't worry about it. But that last mile into Mitchell Bay, the zigzags, I don't have any pictures of it because it's so bad. Last time there was like 20 trees down. We had one guy that had like Coleman gear, so his pack probably weighed like 60 something pounds. And I thought he was going to die on that section. A lot of trees to climb over. It was muddy, zigzags. We saw a lot of bear sign. We ran into a Forest Service crew that were just starting to clear that area, and it was probably going to take them a month. So if I had to choose, it'd be Salt Lake every time. Have I been to Thayer Lake? I have not been to Thayer Lake. In Thayer Lake, it's one of the largest lakes on Admiralty Island. I assume the wind is ripping through there because Hasselberg has a problem with wind too. Thayer Lake has a lodge at the far west side. I don't know if it's still this way, but it used to be. If you looked at their website, it looked like you were looking at a Swedish spa resort. And it was screenshots of a Swedish spa resort and not of the actual Thayer Lodge. So do your research on the Thayer Lodge if you plan on staying there. I haven't looked at their website recently, but that's how it used to be. It may be under new ownership. I don't know. But it is not as fancy as it tries to bill itself. Fishing throughout the trip. I'm pretty sure it's just sport fishing on the lakes. I don't know the regulations. I've done some fishing on other pack rafting trips, not this one. And I've learned that unless you're in it for the sport, don't count on it for food. We had one guy who packed half as much food as everybody else on a river trip because he thought he was going to catch fish the whole time. And he ended the trip probably 10 pounds less. So watch out for that. Anybody else? Happy to answer questions about the trip if you're planning it. For firearms, we took a 10mm pistol. Anything smaller than that, if you've run into some of those brown bear, you're going to wish you had a rifle or a shotgun, but they're real heavy to bring across. I always prefer to have a choice between the bear spray or the firearm just in case something happens. You can kind of choose based on what kind of bear is coming at you and how grumpy it tends to be. So if you don't book the cabins, is it feasible? Yes. There are tons of 3-sided shelters. The 3-sided shelters are first come, first serve. So even if somebody rented the cabin next to that 3-sided shelter at Lake Hasselberg and you're in it first, it's yours. So 3-sided shelters, if you show up, nobody's there, pitch your tent, hang out in the 3-sided shelter. It's good to go. And there's lots of 3-sided shelters. They're not all shown on my map. If you do a Google search for Canoe Route, U.S. Forest Service, Admiralty Island, that kind of thing, it will show you where all the 3-sided shelters are on just about every end of the lake where the portage is, and you go from one side to the other, there's a 3-sided shelter.
What's the cost for a pack raft?
The Rogue Lights by Copapelli are like $600 without a spray skirt, no bells and whistles. Minimum, I would take a Rogue Light. I've seen people do it and been out in, 2-foot chop in Mitchell Bay and done just fine. The mule pack raft that I enjoy is about $1,200, so double the price. But you can stretch your legs out. You can carry more weight. I can carry my dog and my pack and some firewood. I'm 5'10", 220 pounds, like 200 in the summertime. And there's plenty of room in my boat. I can stretch my legs completely out. I can even slouch down in the pack raft a little. So definitely like level of comfort, go bigger pack raft, but you can get away with, a $600 roguelite pack raft from Copapelli if you're trying to go on the cheap. I guess that's it.
Well, thank you again, Brian. This was a great talk. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for letting me do it. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Brandon, we'll have it up on the library web YouTube channel tomorrow, you say?
Yes, so tomorrow we will have Eric Stevens' video up, and we will have Brian's fantastic video up tomorrow as well, barring any technical difficulties. And if you missed Brian's talk from last year, the Adak Island, highly recommend you go check it out. It was one of the best things I've seen in a while. It's still up there, so go check those out. But otherwise, Brian, thank you very much for sharing. And Cindy and Russ, thank you for putting this together. And I just hope everybody has a good night and a good rest of their week.
You're welcome. Hey, can you provide those links with that YouTube? the link to the map and the Facebook link. Is that possible?
Yeah, I'll talk to Brandon about it and we'll get him in the comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, everybody, thank
Everybody.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Brian.
everybody.